Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Pulp Crazy. I'm your host, Jason Aiken. I've received some very nice feedback on last week's episode pertaining to Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan with Christopher Paul Carey and Chuck Loredon's. I'm glad this episode was so well received. I enjoyed listening to these guys talk Tarzan and Burroughs, and knew others would as well. In this week's episode, Chris and Chuck discuss the Farmerian Tarzan, focusing on Farmer's official Tarzan projects, Tarzan Alive, and The Dark Heart of Time, a Tarzan novel. Philip José Farmer was a lifelong Tarzan fan, and while Tarzan Alive is often spoken of, The Dark Heart of Time seems to be neglected. The Dark Heart of Time also gets a bad rap for having extraterrestrial science fiction elements. But as it turns out, that's just Philip José Farmer going over most of our heads. In this episode, Chris explains that Farmer was actually pulling from pre-existing African folklore and mythology. He wasn't just throwing in science fiction elements. I decided to split our conversation right when Chuck began talking about Thomas Yeates' comic series, Tarzan the Beckoning, as Chuck goes into a little bit of Farmer territory here. Chuck then talks briefly about the Hal Foster comic strips, before we move on to discussing Farmer's Tarzan, and how much of a Burroughs fan Farmer was. So picking up where we left off last week, here's Chuck and Chris.
One of the really cool things about Tarzan the Beckoning, and Wynn and I talked to, like I said, we talked to him, and he's really not that familiar with Phil Farmer or his theories, but one of the things that syncs up perfectly is he showed, and Tarzan the Beckoning took place, we assume, in the 90s when it was written, and he actually shows, he shows an old witch doctor who they say is a descendant of Bukawai, that had actually gone and been educated in America, but was an old man now, which fits in perfectly with The Freshman.
Wow. Yeah.
Explain what The Freshman is, and who wrote it.
The Freshman was a short story by Philip José Farmer, which is, he said, was based on a dream that he had, which is essentially, it's an elderly man who goes to take courses at the Lovecraft's Miskatonic University. And it talks about some of the other students he meets. And one of them, and this was written back in the early 70s or late 60s, I'm assuming. And one of the other students is a young African named Bukawai, who's descended from a long line of witch doctors. And that was, that's one of the things that gives it that great Walt Newton connection. I'm assuming that if you're listening to this podcast, you're familiar a little bit with Walt Newton. But I remember seeing that as like, oh wow, this is directly tying in Tarzan to H.P. Lovecraft, because Bukawai was, in the early Tarzan novels, a witch doctor who was more or less Tarzan's arch enemy. Outside of Nikolai Rokoff, was Tarzan's arch enemy. It was a witch doctor that they were always giving each other crap. But anyway, I always thought that was nice unplanned synchronicity that Thomas Yeates threw in this elderly witch doctor named Bukawai, who was a descendant of the original, and mentions that he was educated in America.
Yeah, that was one of those little Easter eggs that Farmer loved to put into his stories. That story came out in, just for the record, in 1979 it was published first.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
But it just fits perfully.
Yeah. If you're interested in reading it, it's in a book that Wynne Scott Eckert and I edited called Tales.
Wait. Tales of the Walt Newton Universe.
Published by Titan Books. Available. You can get it in print form or ebook form. Basically, wherever you can get books.
Every story's a winner.
It's true.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, a lot of good quality stories in there.
I guess that, I mean, one of the things we were going to talk about is like Tarzan written by other people. And that kind of fits in. There's a great story in Tales of the Walt Newton universe written by our friend Winnecker called The Wild Huntsman. And it's excellent.
He doesn't write about Tarzan, but he writes about...
No, but there are Tarzan elements in it that Tarzan would enjoy.
Yeah.
Definitely. And Chris has a story in that too. Quasine and the Bear God.
Ah, yes. That's part of the Kokarsa Ancient Opar series. So it's a missing chapter from Lost Adventure of Quasine that takes place between Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 of the Song of Quasine. That's the novel I co-authored with Farmer.
Yeah, so that Tales of the Walt Newton Universe collection, if you're a Pulp fan, it's a must-buy. You get a lot of quality Walt Newton-related, Pulp-related short fiction in there. And I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Amazon still has it in paperback, and there's an ebook as well. But I think we covered the comics fairly well, unless you guys have another series you wanted to mention besides the Malibu one.
Russ Manning, while I always thought that Joe Kubert captured Tarzan himself perfectly, Russ Manning did so many great stories of Tarzan returning back to these various lost cities from the original novels, and did great visualizations of them. No one did Polo Done as well as Russ Manning did, in my opinion. And also he did a really great story where Tarzan and Korak returned to Pellucidar, which is really, really good. And actually, he segues into the story these are all from his comic strips, and where he segues into it by having, like, there's this hippie cult that is worshiping some bizarre god that turns out to be a Mahar. Which were the pterodactyl, intelligent pterodactyl creatures from Pellucidar, and Tarzan winds up having to follow this thing back to Pellucidar. Great stuff. There was a lot of Gold Key, and Gold Key did a lot of Tarzan comics, but they basically started out basing it on the Johnny Weissmuller stories, but then segueing back into the Burroughs kind of thing. And Marvel did one. Marvel did a series that I think it was Roy Thomas wrote them, and they were drawn by John Buscema. But the artwork-wise, his Tarzan looked too much like his Conan. But they were still fun stories.
Yeah. Cool. What's great is a lot of these comics are being reprinted in nice, like, hardback editions that you can pick up. I've started picking up some of them and trying to play catch up because I am not that well educated in the Tarzan comics.
You can't go wrong with the Kubert books.
I should mention, since we talked quite a bit about Jungle Tales of Tarzan, that there's a great adaptation graphic novel version of Jungle Tales of Tarzan out now, written by Martin Powell and illustrated by a host of different artists. It's really quite good.
I've got that on order. I should be getting it soon.
It's good. It's very good.
Excellent. Well, I guess we'll move on to a Tarzan book that's special to both of you guys. We'll touch on it lightly because we could probably do just a whole episode on this book alone. But Tarzan Alive by Philip José Farmer.
It's the reason that the three of us are talking right now. That book and Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life. I don't think the three of us would be talking right now were it not for Farmer's books.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely the case.
Yeah, the Tarzan Alive is a book that came out in 1972 from Doubleday, and in it, Farmer treats Tarzan as a real-life character, as somebody that he had a brief interview with and other communication with, and did a lot of research into his genealogy and family and background, and wrote a definitive biography of him, treating him as if he were a real life character, a real life person. And it's also the founding book for Wold Newton, the Wold Newton family concept, preceded only by the Esquire interview. And Esquire magazine published right before Tarzan Alive came out the Farmer's interview with Lord Greystoke, his 15-minute interview. So it's the book that launched the whole Wold Newton concept. So very, very important to Farmer fans, at least.
What do you guys think about how to go about reading Tarzan Alive? Do you want to get a few Tarzan books? Would someone want to get a few Tarzan books under their belt before they tackle that? Or could they start fresh and just read that? What's your recommendation?
It's hard to say. Like I said, when I read it, I was reading the Tarzan books, and I was like 6 or 7, or probably 7 or 8 books into the series. So I read up to that point and then stopped. So I would kind of recommend reading. I would recommend reading all the Tarzan books first, and then reading Tarzan Alive. But if you're not that obsessive like I was, definitely get the first few Tarzan novels under your belt first, and then read it.
I agree.
More rewarding experience.
Whereas most people who haven't read the novels are still kind of stuck in the, their perception of Tarzan is still me, Tarzan, you, Jane, Unc, like Ugg, an illiterate, muscle-bound guy living in the jungle. It is best to read. I think you'll appreciate it more.
Yeah.
It's like eating. It's like the Tarzan Alive is the dessert, and reading the Burroughs novels, that's the meat. That's you won't appreciate it as much because this Farmer loved Tarzan. He loved the Tarzan novels, and this was all done completely out of love for this. It wasn't a job for him. This was a complete labor of love. So you got to understand what he loves before you hear him talking about why he loves it. Because you'll love it too. It's Tarzan.
Yeah.
That's a good point about Farmer loving Tarzan too. A while back I was on Ancestry.com doing genealogical research, and I typed his name in there just for fun to see what would come up. And his senior yearbook came up. Oh, Mr. G.
Yes, Mr. G. G, hush.
We have a guest. Hi, Mr. G.
Unc G. $10 Unc.
And it was cool to see a scan of his senior yearbook, and for that particular class of graduates, each of them had a poem attached to them, and I think his poem was Philip José Farmer. If he can, he'll make you think he's Tarzan. And
I did not know about that.
I'm not sure if he wrote it or if someone else wrote it, but you can definitely, even back in like his high school days, he was definitely a big Tarzan fan.
Yeah, I mean, way before that, he was a Tarzan fan. He talks about it in some of his autobiographical essays. He got the book. I can't remember what age he was, but he was quite young. I think probably eight years old or something.
Oh wow!
And that's one of the reasons he really likes libraries, is because he read a lot of the Tarzan books from his local library.
So he was born in 1918. Farmer was.
Yeah, he was reading them in the 1920s.
Okay.
So as they were coming out, and he there's another, I can't remember which essay it is, but he talks about playing Tarzan. Like he would he would act like he was Tarzan when he was, very, very young. He's quite an athletic kid. Farmer was so.
And those yearbook photos of the football team and track team that he was on, you could definitely tell he was a really put together athletic kid.
Yeah.
Well, this is interesting. So, who didn't in our generation? Who didn't play Tarzan?
Yeah,
I know I did. I know I still do. In my day job, I'm a groundskeeper. I'm a horticultural assistant, and one of my favorite things to do is I'm the guy that isn't afraid to climb up in the tree with a chainsaw, because my coworkers are kind of afraid of heights, and it's like, I love it. I love being up in a tree, and being up in a tree doing something kind of dangerous makes it even cooler.
Yeah, go on.
No, just being a kid running. When you go out in the woods. I live in the South. Just surrounded by trees all the time, and I would love just playing by myself, running around in the woods and playing Tarzan and looking for spores. The spore of Tantor. And talking in Mangani language. Nobody else could hear it, but it was just me, and it was just superimposing Tarzan over myself and Usha the wind carrying the scent, just all of that. It was just the best thing. Tarzan is just the best character ever. That's how I feel about it. I just love Tarzan, and I will never get over my love for Tarzan. And he's the ultimate hero to me, because he doesn't need gadgets. He can make, as long as he doesn't even have to have his knife. His ingenuity. You can throw him naked into a situation, and he's gonna come out on top, because he's Tarzan.
Yeah,
Press God.
I did playing as Tarzan as well when I was young, and learned the ape language. One of the kind of abridged children's version books of Tarzan had an ape English dictionary in it, an English ape dictionary, and I memorized all of those words and spoke them. And my uncle, who was also a Burroughs fan, knew them as well, and we would communicate when I would go to visit him during the summer. We would communicate for a large part in Mangani. And it would kind of drive all the people around us crazy, because they were like, stop doing that, And we would merge ape words together, because there was only a limited vocabulary, But we would merge them together to make new words, to make a word for car, or make a word for airplane, or whatever, And that was really, really fun.
I'm envious, because with me I was all alone. Nobody else had that fascination that I did. So I'm envious of you that you had somebody to share that with.
Yeah, it's only once a year that I would get to see him, but it was really fun.
Well, that's cool that you guys all started early. I really didn't discover Tarzan until the Disney movie, which came out when I was in high school. And then I read the books later in my 20s.
So, Jason, tell us about your perceptions coming into it, more as an adult, reading these books. What was it like for you? Was it jolting? Did it seem outdated? Did it seem vital, or what?
I started reading it. I was in my late 20s. I was probably 28 and 29 when I first started reading Tarzan of the Apes, and then The Return of Tarzan. And I should say, saying I read these isn't entirely accurate. I got the audiobooks. At the time, I was working a 3 to 11 shift, where I was able to listen to audiobooks constantly. And I was very taken in by the story. Prior to this, I had been mainly into comic books, and just the opening chapters of Tarzan of the Apes by Burroughs, it was like he wrote down the formula for the origin of a quote-unquote superhero or heroic character. It was just all on the page there. It was like reading a myth, and I just really enjoyed it. And as a matter of fact, the audiobook I got, it was narrated by a lady. I can't remember her name, but it was almost like the spirit of Kala was telling the story for the first book, and it was very engrossing. And I can't believe I don't know if I should spoil the ending because I didn't see it coming, but it's a cliffhanger, so I won't spoil it. But it doesn't end the way I thought it would.
It's one of my all-time favorite quotes. I love that. It's by the way, little boy, how did you get into that Bali jungle? My mother was an ape. She couldn't tell me much about it. I never knew who my father was. I get goosebumps just thinking about that line.
And that just, luckily I had the Return of Tarzan downloaded on my iPod, and I just went right into it. But I can't imagine being someone back in October 1912, finishing that issue of All Story, and having to wait to see read the Return of Tarzan.
Yeah, but back then nobody knew there was going to be a sequel.
Oh, true. Oh, yeah, that would be a completely different ending.
Right.
Yeah. No, like the anticipation would be there, but not the expectations of what comes after.
Right. Nobody knew there was going to be a sequel. That was like, as far as they knew, that was the end. But that brings what we were talking about comics earlier. This is another thing I got to recommend, and you probably still find this in a collected edition that Dark Horse came out with. It's called Le Monster, and it's several tales told in between Tarzan, in between Tarzan leaving Africa and meeting up, and him arriving in Baltimore. And they were actually, the foreword is written by Farmer himself. 3 great tales. Has him mixing it up with other great fictional characters. I highly recommend it. Le Monster. I think that's my French ancestors would horse with me if they heard my butchering of it. How would you say it, Chris? Le Monster.
I think it's
Le Monster.
Le Monstre.
Le Monstre.
Yeah. So I read that one too. That's one of the ones that I did read. Largely because I bought it because I knew that the original collected edition had a Farmer introduction to it, and it was really good. I would rate that up there as one of my favorites. And it is in the new Dark Horse Tarzan Omnibus.
Oh, okay.
Without Farmer's Forward, it doesn't have Farmer's Forward in it, but you can get it now.
I'd still be able to find a cheap copy though of the one with Farmer's Forward.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. Yeah, they're out there for sure. But we should also getting back to Farmer. I should say his dream came true in 1999, and he got to write his own Tarzan novel, Tarzan in the Dark Heart of Time, or I think it's just Tarzan: The Dark Heart of Time. Correct?
Yeah, it's the Dark Heart of Time: a Tarzan novel is the official title. So. It was a poorly marketed book, unfortunately. They should have called it Tarzan: The Dark Heart of Time and put Tarzan in giant letters on the cover. They didn't. And
actually have a cover that showed Tarzan.
Yeah.
Instead of this, it was this kind of strange avant-garde Dada-esque collage that didn't make any sense and would not draw anybody into it. If you put Tarzan on the cover, it would sold it.
It was almost like they were afraid to call it a Tarzan book, which is ridiculous. And it was originally supposed to come out as a trade paperback. It was supposed to come out a year or two earlier than it did. They held it back to be released with... I can't remember if it was the... I guess it was the Disney. Was it the Disney movie? To time it more with the Disney movie.
Oh yeah, because that came out in '99 too. Yeah.
And it came out in a mass market edition. There were only as far as like my bookstore, there were only like a handful of copies. The next time I went back, they were gone, and then you never saw the book again. And I just feel like it was a botched marketing job. Like they wrote, Farmer wrote this great, adult novel for not adult, but not for kids, just a straight Tarzan novel, rather than a dumbed down cartoon type thing.
Well, it was Farmer. Farmer wasn't trying to write in Burroughs style. Farmer was writing a Tarzan novel in Farmer style.
Yeah, so he wrote it in Farmer style. There is some Burroughs. There was actually a more Burroughs style in it than I had thought there was going to be, and later I found out that was because he was asked to make it read more like Burroughs and to add some Burroughs style to it, even though he himself wanted to write it just in his own style. And so I think he went back and tweaked it a little bit, and you get those. He did the alternating scene thing like Burroughs did, where you have the villain's viewpoint and then you go back to Tarzan's viewpoint, and it's a very strange novel, in that it has some science fictional elements that show up in it. The Dark Heart of Time being the main science fictional element, and I think it was hard for people to wrap their minds around what he was getting at. Like I've read the novel a number of times. It wasn't until more recently that I was actually talking to Jason and realized that he got a lot of the alien mythology in the book, the extraterrestrial mythology in the book, actually comes from the Dogon tribe, who, according to there's a book out called what was it, Serious Mystery?
Yeah, the Serious Mystery by Robert Temple, which
was published right. A new edition of it was published right when he was writing The Dark Heart of Time, and I have photos that I took of Phil's library when he was still with us, and he had that book right on his bookshelf. That same edition that came out right when he was researching it, right when he was, writing The Dark Heart of Time. And so it's clear to me that he read that book. That was part of his research for The Dark Heart of Time, and he inserted this Dogon mythology in it. In fact, I've seen it in his notes. He actually writes in the margins of one of his pages of notes. He writes about the Dogon tribe and their myths, and that's an aspect I think that a lot of people totally miss. They think that he's just coming out of left field with this extraterrestrial thing, but he's actually using real African mythology in the book.
Which also makes you wonder about all the other weird little references he puts in there. Maybe that's in that. If we dig into that Dogon mythology a little bit more, we might be able to come up with something. Some other references in there.
Yeah, I saw an interview with Phil. It was on a local TV, like Peoria television station, like a public TV, and it was about The Dark Heart of Time. He was interviewed about that book, and he talks about, there's a character in it named Rothmana, who is the custodian, basically, of the Dark Heart of Time, which is this large crystal tree that has very mysterious properties and can allow you to see through time and space when you touch it. And he talks about Rothmana in there and says that she was inspired by H. Rider Haggard's Asha, or Aisha, as a lot of people pronounce it. And then he also went on to talk about how Law was obviously a literary descendant of Haggard's Asha character. So he was doing a lot in there. I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't some Easter egg references in there to Haggard, and some other disguised ones to the Tarzan books and maybe even the ancient Opar books. Um, and there's an interest. Speaking of Easter eggs, there's an interesting Easter egg about what's the Hemingway story?
The Snows of Kilimanjaro.
Yes, exactly. Where they find
the leopard.
They find a leopard at the top, unexplained why it's there.
Frozen leopard. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there is a brief reference in there to Tarzan being involved in the story of why there was a leopard at the top of Kilimanjaro in the Hemingway story. So, Farmer loved to layer in a lot of stuff into his works, and he certainly did that with The Dark Heart of Time as well.
Yeah, I've read that twice now, and the second time, I heavily made notes about it, and there's still some layers in there and some references he makes that I'm not sure what they're referring to, but knowing him, it's referring to something. I don't think he just threw stuff in there randomly.
Yeah, there's a criticism that I've seen leveled at the novel, which is that it deals a lot with immortality, and there's a millionaire who is seeking out Tarzan, wants to capture Tarzan because he believes he holds the secret of eternal youth. And the criticism leveled at the book is that while this was back when Tarzan was still relatively young, it takes place between Tarzan the Untamed and Tarzan the Terrible, and actually follows on a little lost storyline that Burroughs left, and so the criticism is that why would this millionaire even suspect that there was anything that Tarzan held the secret to immortality? But I recommend that you read the book again. There's about a 2-page section where Farmer explains exactly why this millionaire thinks that. And so that's an unfair criticism. That's somebody who the people, leveling that criticism at the book have not actually read it closely.
Very good. Yeah, I highly recommend it. It's, like I said, I've read it twice, and I have a lot to read, so I very rarely read books again. But this was so good, and there's just so much depth to it. I definitely made the attempt to read it again, and heck, I'll probably end up reading it again once I have more Haggard under my belt, and maybe look at this Dogon religion a little
I've
closer.
never heard of that Dogon religion. This is completely new to me.
Yeah,
I think Chris figured it out just, it was just last year during my reread. I mentioned there's a passage about, the brightest or whitest star in the sky. And I mentioned that to Chris, and he picked up on that it was Sirius, which is...
Go on.
Which is, I guess, where the star where the aliens from the Dark Heart of Time come from. And I guess that ties into the Dogon religion as well.
The Dogon, the book that, the Sirius Mystery, is all about how this tribe somehow knew, before there were, radio telescopes and, somehow knew that that Sirius was I think a double star system.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm. And so they knew about this, that there was a second star, and there was no way that they possibly could have known. And so the Sirius Mystery postulates, gathers up a lot of fringe evidence that, maybe they knew something, maybe they were contacted by aliens in the past. This is ancient astronaut stuff, but Farmer was playing with it and seeding it into the Dark Heart of Time. And I think that's something that was a piece of the puzzle. When I read the book, I loved it, especially his characterization of Tarzan, which was one of the first, non-Burroughs characterizations that was true to Burroughs, I felt. The spirit of Tarzan. But you have this science fictional element, and you're kind of being like, what's going on here, And when I realized, this past year, that he was pulling a lot of that from African mythology, then it's like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. Phil was a very anthropological writer, and he's drawing in this fantastic element, but it's based on reality.
Yeah, and this came out in 1999 too. So, in what's 15 years later, that's just like the kind of subtlety he had. It took, as far as I know, 15 years for someone to kind of make that connection that we know of.
Yeah, I've read a lot of Phil's unpublished notes, and for a long time he was working on a story that took on a lot of permutations in his notes called of course I draw a blank on the title right now, but it was about time, and he was playing with this concept of time. It was called Time Has Its Mirages. Time Has Its Mirages was the story. Back when I was editing Farmer File, we published some notes from that. But I believe he was. I'm trying to think if I saw that in his Dark Heart of Time notes. But I believe he was taking that concept he was building. He never threw an idea away. He always tried to save it and do something with it. And I think he was percolating on this idea since probably the 1970s. And it points that it had some Cthulhu elements to it, Lovecraftian elements to it. But I think he took that and used it in the Dark Heart of Time. Used a lot of his thoughts about time, and it's interesting that his book Time's Last Gift, which there is a Jungle Lord character in it who will seem very familiar to readers of the Tarzan novels, called John Gribardson, however you pronounce it, and it's interesting that then his Tarzan. So that was about a time traveling Jungle Lord character. It's interesting that when he wrote his official book about Tarzan, his authorized Tarzan novel, that he also drew this time element into it. What was he doing there? Was he trying to make connections? Why was it that Tarzan, when he approached the Dark Heart of Time, seemed to destabilize the crystal tree of time? I won't give away the ending, but you find out that Tarzan has is having an effect on the tree itself, on this piece of alien technology. Why is that? Why would he affect a mechanism, a device that basically can see through space and time? And my theory goes that was an allusion to the Dark Heart of Time, something to do with the time looping Jungle Lord, something in his very being, maybe because in the future he would time loop back into prehistory,
which goes back to what we were talking about earlier as to Tarzan being an opener of portals.
Yeah, it very much fits in with that. So there's something different about Tarzan, maybe because he has actually, somehow bound himself up with, some kind of quantum field on Earth, in Earth's history. And so that's where I think Farmer was going with it.
Cool. Yeah, the Dark Heart of Time, it's really an interesting book to read if you can find a copy. We've been talking about how Farmer, he brought some of his own elements into it, but the characterization of Tarzan, the pacing of the story, the action scenes, you could very much harken those back to Burroughs. Farmer really puts Tarzan in some situations that only he could get out of. There's one situation where he's suspended by rope on this platform with his hands tied behind his back, and he actually manages to climb the rope with just his teeth and the two big toes on his feet.
You know why?
That's just a great scene.
You know why? Because he's Tarzan. That's why.
Yep. In that interview that I watched with Phil, that scene was actually brought up, and I think Phil was quite proud of that scene. It's a great one.
Yeah, and there are copies. I mean, this book is rare, but the prices of it in the secondary market for reader copies have come down substantially in the last couple years. I was seeing these going for like $20 or $30 for a copy, but lately, good used reader copies are going for about maybe $7 or $8 on Amazon. So yeah, if you're a Burroughs fan and you want to read a Tarzan story that's faithful to Burroughs, but at the same time brings in some of Farmer's concepts, I definitely recommend The Dark Heart of Time.
I remember just having to go just check out the bookstore every week, because back then we didn't really have the net, to tell us when something's coming out. And I just remember, I really don't, I don't remember. I remember just getting a general idea that it was like reading in Starlog that it was going to be published soon. And I remember just going to the bookstore every week to check out to see if it had come out yet. And I remember as soon as it came out, I snagged it.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I pretty much harassed the bookstores. It's like, when's it coming in? When's it coming in? And when it came in, I bought like 5 copies of it because I knew that from past experience with some of these books, like Escape from Loki, they go out of print quickly and aren't going to be around very much longer. So, in fact, I think that's how. Did I give you one of my copies, Jason? As
a matter of fact, I still have that one, and it was in great condition. So I picked up one of those reader copies off Amazon for research purposes now, and I really appreciated that because, like I said, I couldn't find a copy of it for a reasonable price anywhere.
Yeah, so hopefully one day, I'm hoping it will be reprinted. There's no reason it can't be reprinted. I'm sure it will be one day. So that would be great.
Oh yeah, that would be amazing to have a new edition of that come out for sure.
Well, maybe a limited edition with or a bonus, with bonus material in it or something like that. So
yeah, and I'd like to see it in a hardcover edition too. That would be really nice, I think.
Yeah, with better cover art.
Yeah.
Right, Chuck?
Yep. Yeah, if they could get Thomas Yeates to do it, that would be excellent.
Oh yeah.
Definitely. Well, guys, I think we covered a lot of ground in this episode, and I might actually, if you're listening to the podcast, you'll know whether or not I did this, but I might just break this little discussion on The Dark Heart of Time off into its own episode, if that's possible, but we'll see how that goes, though. But I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to kind of say what you guys are up to creatively, and kind of just give you an opportunity to plug stuff you're working on now.
Okay, I'll go first because mine's going to be short. I'm working on, in fact, I read some of this to Chris after Pulp Fest. I'm working on a short story based on my monster concept of maximum observation and or nullification of supernatural terror's autonomous agents headquarters. And it's called The Bathmat of Dorian Gray, and I hope to get it finished soon. I don't know where it's going to be published or if it's going to be published, but that, and I teach an after-school program. I teach in an after-school program called the Renzi Center, where I help kids make their own comics. That's a lot of fun. We start the fall session Monday, and I do paintings and stuff. I just like to do stuff and hang out with my creative pals like you and Chris.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll mention that. Yeah, I heard Chuck read his manuscript of that story he mentioned to Mike Cardo and I while we were driving back from Pulp Fest, and it was great. You really need to get that published.
I hope to.
Fun read.
Nice.
Fun story. I am currently working on, well, I should mention I have a new book out, Hadon, King of Opar, which is the 4th volume in the Kokarsa series. It takes place after the Song of Kwasin, the novel I co-wrote with Farmer. And it is set in the lost city of ancient Opar. My next project is going to be an editing project. I believe I'm going to be launching into, in about a week from now, I've carved out time to prepare a new edition of the Song of Kwasin and hopefully get that out sooner than later. And after that, I'm launching into writing Blood of Ancient Opar, which is the sequel to Hadon, King of Opar. And hopefully that will come out next year at Pulp Fest.
Oh, cool.
So,
second phase of the Opar relaunch we're moving into.
Yep.
Excellent.
So, and then
I can't wait.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
Yeah, that's going to be great to have the Song of Kwasin in a standalone edition finally, and everyone will get the chance to pick that up and own it and, read it if they didn't get Gods of Opar previously.
Yeah, so the Song of Kwasin was previously only published in an omnibus, hardcover omnibus. So I imagine there are a lot of readers out there who have like the original DAW paperbacks of Hadon of Ancient Opar and Flight to Opar, but never got the third book because it was only available in an expensive hardcover, so it'll be good to get out there.
Great. Well, all right, guys. I really want to thank you guys for being on and talking Tarzan, Burroughs, and all related topics. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. Thanks for having us on, Jason.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, this kind of like kind of alleviates the post-Pulp Fest depression. Being able to talk to you guys again.
Agreed.
Yep, definitely. And all right, everyone. Well, thanks for listening to Pulp Crazy. And this is Jason Aiken with
Christopher Paul Carey
and the Savage Chuck Lawrence.
And thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Pulp Crazy is located at pulpcrazy.com. I'm at Pulp Crazy on Twitter and facebook.com/pulpcrazy. My YouTube channel is located at youtube.com/pulpcrazy or youtube.com/pulpcast. Both links will bring you right to the YouTube channel. You can also email me at pulpcrazy@gmail.com. Thanks for watching, everyone, and see you next time.